G'day guys, welcome to Straight Talk. And I'm here with Jordan Sullivan. He's a founder of the Fight Dietitian. And I actually came across Jordy through helping out Alex Volkanovski more recently. And I saw that Alex was following. I actually looked at everybody Alex was following nearly, and then I saw he was following the Fight Dietitian. And then I started following the Fight Dietitian, and then I was looking at some of the stuff that Jordan was putting up, and I found it sort of quite fascinating. So I thought I'd do a straight talk with Jordan about his business, because I'm an older bloke, and I come from an old environment where, like, to be honest, like I remember when I was playing footy when I was a young bloke on Saturday mornings, and when we're playing rep footy before the guys got into grade. The big thing was you ate 2 raw eggs and a steak on Saturday morning before you played a game of footy. And the guys that used to do that, I remember Graham Hughes, who played State of Origin for New South Wales. He was one of the great players of the Canterbury Bankstown sort of lineage. And in fact, he played for cricket for New South Wales too, Graham. And his dad was a great proponent of this egg and raw egg and steak. And because he played so well, we all just assumed that was the deal. Like, that's what you had to do. And little did we know, the only reason he played so well was because he had a heap of talent and genetically.
Yeah, that's right.
And he did practice a lot too, to be honest with you. He was a big practicer. But so, I'm fascinated with this whole diet thing. I've done a bit of boxing, and I know I've had to make weight, and I've gone through the old school process of making weight. So I just wanted to talk to this young man here who's actually applies science and technology behind diets for fighters, but just diets generally are pretty important to me in terms of just training, because everybody trains. So I want to talk to this young man about his business called the Fight Dietitian. So first and foremost, welcome, Jordy. Secondly, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself? I mean, where you live, what your background is, what your qualifications are? Because I know about it on the website, but you tell me anyway.
Yeah. Cheers for having us on as well, Mark. Big fan of the show. So, my name's Jordan Sullivan. I'm a dietitian from Brisbane up in Queensland. So, my background is tertiary-wise. I have a undergraduate degree in exercise and nutrition science. And then I was silly enough to go back to university and spend a lot more money and get a master's of dietetics study. So I did that, and I finished that in about mid-2015. So I guess how I got into the combat sports world is, I guess, what everyone's interested. I grew up playing rugby, very similar to what you just said then. And I remember on Saturday mornings, we had a team dietitian when I was playing rep footy. And I remember I could not tell you one thing that dietitian taught me. And I remember I was very similar. My old man used to get us to eat steak and eggs and things like that. It's very funny when you said that. Knowing what I know now, it's probably not the best diet to be having. But like you said, and that's something we'll probably talk about, talent plays a big role in all of this, and the mentality, especially when it comes to fighting. But yeah, the Fight Dietitian is a company that next week has its 2-year anniversary. So it's quite young, and it's only a pretty recent thing. And I guess the way that it came about was the recognition of what you just said, that maybe in combat sports, especially in, the older ones that like boxing, judo, things like that there are some pretty unfavorable and pretty risky behaviors and things that people do. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but over the years, there've been quite a few deaths of people. There's the famous one in American college wrestling where 3 wrestlers died from cutting weight all on the same weekend. And then recently in 2016, we had a young girl from Perth in Australia who was in Thailand who died trying to make weight. So in terms of the practices that are being used to attempt to make weight, there's a big issue. And I really felt in that area, it wasn't really being addressed. And I guess we can get into how that all got to be. And I even found, even at the highest levels, when I got exposed to people doing this at, say, the UFC was my introduction, because I work mostly with mixed martial artists. I even found at the highest level, these guys who you look at and you idolize and you say, hey, these are elite athletes, they still weren't doing it as well as they could be. And within that, me, you, Mark, everyone else that's listening and who watches and idolize these guys, there's a real trickle down effect. And I noticed that if you're looking at the top guy, the world champion, and he's making weight in a dangerous way and doing these big weight cuts, then all the young guys who look up to them, they're going to think that's the normal and the cool thing to do. So that was pretty much why I started the Fight Dietitian, was to add some, like you said, some more science, some more rhyme and reason behind this process, and make sure that, you know, we're not having people dying just to be able to compete in a sport that they love.
Or equally, I mean, if you could just broaden it out a little bit, people trying to be, even for vanity purposes or just general health purposes, training every day or every second day, they're not going to fight, but they're just training, but they also decide to go on diets, or they don't take enough water in, etc. I'm going to come back to, because that's where I want to sort of land. I just quickly want to come back to something really important, and I think it's important. You've only been in business for 2 years. You got your master's in 2015, but I also want to show everybody how you have somehow leapfrogged yourself into the highest echelons of the UFC world, for example. Give me an example of, just give me an example more recently, how you helped out, for example, Alex Volkanovski to defend his UFC featherweight title. So what would you typically do for someone like Alex?
Yeah. So that was actually our second camp with Alex. So I helped him when he won the title, and then again when he defended it, both against Max. So essentially what the game plan was, Alex, and I always say this to all my guys, like if they're coming on, they've been doing it for years and years, right? Like I'm kind of optimizing the process.
But bear in mind, bear in mind, he's a big guy. I mean, like,
he's a big guy.
Division, 67 kilos. Featherweight in UFC is different than featherweight in boxing. It's 67.
Yeah, 66 1. Right. For the champs, they have to weigh in about 65-8. So, right, okay. But yeah, you're right. He's a big guy. So the first thing that you do when you're looking at guys like this is you need to do some assessments on their body composition, because you need to know what you're playing with, right? There's a big difference between what you lose in the fight camp, which is, if people at home don't know, is just an arbitrary number of weeks, 4, 6, 8 weeks, where people train to get ready for a fight. And then we break it up into, say, a fight week. During that fight camp, you're losing body fat. During that fight week, you're playing with water and manipulating water. And we'll talk about that later. But if you're going to manipulate body fat in that fight camp, the first thing you need to do is assess how much body fat is there to play with. So Alex trains. He's very diligent all year round, trains. He stays in great nick. Like you said, he's a big guy. And he's very stocky. He's got a good build. So the first thing is assessing, well, how much body fat do we have? So that's the first thing. You know, we can use body impedance analysis scans. We can use skin folds. We can get an assessment. So we come in, hey, Volk, where are you at with your body fat? We have some pretty good ranges where I like guys to be sitting at the end of that fight camp. If they start at, say, 15% body fat, there's a range that I ideally like to take male athletes before they get to that fight camp. And then essentially you just work backwards. You say, hey, Volk, let's say you're 15%. I want to get you to 6% body fat. We've got that room to play with. And then you can start designing your fight camp nutrition. And you can say, okay, well, we need to lose, let's say, 5 kilos over 5 weeks. We need to lose 1 kilo a week. I can start designing his nutrition protocol so he's in the appropriate calorie deficit to reach those targets.
So let's say we got a fight camp, and let's say the fight camp is somewhere between, let's just say it's an 8-week camp or 2-month camp or 8 to 10 week camp, which is probably about pretty normal. This is not fight week, but this is the camp. So in other words, as you just said, Jordy, you're trying to lose weight, lose fat, as opposed to losing water, or losing fat. And the water bit's much more scientific, and it's actually quite critical. So we've got to park that for a second. We're just losing fat. In other words, losing the gut or the fat around. And by the way, there's fat distributed all over a whole body. It's not just around your stomach, it's everywhere, isn't it? I guess it's all over your arms, your neck, your face, etc. So do you sort of saying, this is how I used to approach it until I first consulted you more recently, but this is how I approach it, is that I get off the carbs, no, nothing white, that old saying, no white bread, no white rice, no sugar, etc. And pretty much I just eat vegetables and protein. That's what I would do. And I've done it in the past, and I've lost a lot of weight, but what I've experienced is I lost a lot of strength. I've lost a lot of everything. I got very tired. In fact, I usually I can get down a little bit because, you're training and, you're putting plenty of pressure on yourself. What would you do to Alex? I mean, how do you rebalance them? Is it rebalancing? Is that what you're trying to do? Or are you just cutting things back in overall sense?
In an overall sense, I think it's important to recognize, like, there's 2 main things we're trying to focus on within that fight camp period, because losing weight isn't hard, Mark. You could lose weight. You don't need to pay me money to tell you how to lose weight. I'm sure most people who are listening understand that if you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight. And if you can track your macros and blah, blah, blah. The difference is you and I, or you train quite a lot. It's Alex is training 2 to 3 times a day, right? And it's very high intensity. So the focus then becomes, okay, we need to lose this weight, but we need to make sure that he's performing at each one of those training sessions. And we have 2 big philosophies where we're fueling performance and then we're fueling the recovery after each training session so we can come back and perform at the next one. And you say that, okay, you cut out white things and you cut out the carbs. It's very, very common because as a nutrient, as a substance, carbs holds a lot of water in the body. When we store carbohydrate in the body, you hold about 2 to 3 grams for every 1 gram of glycogen is what we call it. The energy storage in your muscle, you hold 2 to 3 grams of water. So when you cut carbohydrates out of your diet, you lose initially quite a lot. But then the caveat to that is that combat sports, boxing, mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, these sports are what we call highly glycolytic sports. And what that means, your glycolytic system is an energy system that you're using for about 80 to 90% of your training. And that system depends on carbohydrates. And we were talking about a bit earlier about the steak and eggs. And you see that a lot. And you probably experience when you cut out all the white carbs, you're essentially removing the fuel, the petrol that you're putting in your V8 super engine. And then you're trying to run that car on very minimal petrol. And you see it a lot. You feel fucked. Yeah, exactly. And you see that though. But the thing is with combat sport athletes, and you'll know this better than anyone, Mark, they're tough bastards and they'll just push through. The thing is that if we come back to those 2 principles and me as a dietitian, us as a company are focusing on performance nutrition, performance and recovery, you cutting out carbohydrates, 1, you're not going to be getting the best performance every single session, which if you're leading up to a world title fight like Alex was, you need to be doing that. And 2, you need carbohydrates to refuel. You need to put those carbohydrates back in the muscle. So when you turn up from your hitting pads in the morning, you rock back up to wrestling that night, you can go and you can get the best out of that session, because a fight camp, ultimately, the result of a fight camp is how you go in every single individual session. And it's not always the case, but it makes sense. If you can do more better sessions than your opponent, come fight night, you're probably going to be in a better spot. So that's the principle. And it's a very common thing that you see, but carbohydrates, in short, they're the absolute fuel. They're the rocket fuel behind all combat sports training. So we need them, and we need a lot of them.
So could you just give me an example then, Geordie, that does that mean though, I mean, I used to always be told that, which by the way is no benchmark or proxy for anything, what I've always been told, is that you should take, you should drink a protein type drink after you train within 20 minutes or something like that, because there's the so-called window. And some trainers used to say to me, alongside with the protein, you should have some pineapple juice or pineapple pieces or a banana or some of that in the shake, you know, like in a blender. Or should you have it before? I mean, how does it all work? Because other people tell me, no, you should always have oats 1 hour before, like a little bit of oats 1 hour before you train, and a banana. Like, it's confusing. So what are we talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Mark, and what's that old saying? There's wisdom in the gum trees or whatever it is. And you're completely right. Like, that's not entirely wrong. Like, after training, yeah, I'm not going to say that there's an absolute window. I think where the evidence says right now, as long as you've got a consistent protein intake throughout the day, there's not necessarily a real need to put it in straight after. But say the pineapple juice, getting carbohydrates in, it makes sense. Again, if we're talking about that recovery, Mark, you just did 8 rounds of sparring in the morning, and then you're going to go do pads or something in the afternoon. You probably just burned all your carbohydrates out. So yes, put those carbohydrates back in, whether that's through your complex carbohydrate. It's probably better if you mix up the sources, and we could talk about that later. Say if you have the pineapple juice, it's fruit sugar, right? But then say have it with the oats as well, which is a different type of carbohydrate. And then you put the carbohydrates back in, you fuel the muscles back up, and then you've got the energy. But the other caveat to that is, okay, a protein shake would make sense, because given that you've put it in at 0 hour of your day, 3rd hour of your day, 6th hour of your day, 9th hour of your day, if that lines up, that's after your workout, then for sure you can put protein in with those carbohydrates, because, and we don't need to go on the science of it, it's just going to help get it into the muscle as well. So, like I said, there's wisdom in the gum trees. Like your boxing coach wasn't completely off. There's probably, it's not too bad, but again, it's fueling up for that session beforehand. So it's like, if you want to go the full 9 yards, if you're sparring 8 rounds, that's a lot of energy. You're burning a lot of carbohydrates in that session. It would make sense to make sure that you've either loaded up the night before, so your muscles are full of the carbohydrate, the glycogen, the energy, or you've put something in beforehand, because you're going to rip that really fast. And then, hey, for some guys, depending on how much like weight we need, and if that's the primary session of the week, say sparring, where the goal is we need you to perform as close as what you're going to be during that fight, we might even be looking at getting carbohydrates in between rounds. We might be using a sports drink. We might be using something else. So those rounds are as good as what they can be. Because like you said before, you see it all the time with fighters. They rock up to their sparring after a week of eating no carbs, and then they're just dead. And then they just can't put their hands up and they're just getting dolloped. And it's like, what's the point of that?
Well, where does fat fit into all this then? So, I mean, the old thinking that we used to have is that don't have any carbs and get in and train, and you'll get your energy by burning fat. In other words, somehow the fat will substitute for the carbs. Because from what you're saying is, I've got to replace the carbs into my muscle system when I expel it. Like I do it now, I've got to go and put it in over the next day before I train next time. But where does fat come into? What role has our body fat got to play? And by the way, I would like you to explain to us too, when you talk about carbs, what about eating fats? I mean, people used to say, forget about the carbohydrates, you know, these, I don't know what you call them, you know, the paleo people, just eat fats, you know, like oils and fat on steak and stuff like that. So just on the first one though, where does our own body fat fit into all this in terms of energy sources? And what's the relationship between eating fat and eating carbohydrates?
Yeah. So fat's super important. Like as a role in the body, it stores our vitamins and minerals, and it's super important, especially for guys. Like cholesterol, it's the backbone to a lot of hormones, say testosterone. It's really, really important. So having fat in your diet, especially in a fight camp when you're reducing your body fat as a means to lose weight, you see this a lot with guys where say their testosterone will come down purely because they have less body fat. So ensuring that you have fat in your diet is really important. However, fat is very calorically dense. So it has about 2.5 times the amount of calories per gram as compared to carbohydrates and protein. So in a sense, where we talk about the big picture of this fight camp, where we need to be in a calorie deficit, fat is one of the easiest ways to bring down, or one of the easiest macronutrients to bring down to get in that calorie deficit. However, the caveat is you can't remove fat because it's important for vitamins and minerals and your hormone health, and it's important for all these other things. So we usually keep it at a minimum, the minimum of what we would consider healthy to keep your hormonal health good. In terms of energy within training, I spoke about before about the carbohydrates with the glycogen and using that as your muscle. We're not going to get into the science because the science is boring, but a good analogy to think is carbohydrates are like rocket fuel or like fireworks. They just pop really, really fast. Bang, 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 bang. The energy system and the way your body uses carbohydrate is really fast. It's really efficient. And I guess it makes sense. Say if a bear ran into your room right now, Mark, you need a fast energy system to either stand up and box the bear or run away from it. So you need a really fast energy system. Yeah, a really fast energy system. When it comes to fats, it's a lot slower of a process. So fats absolutely can provide a lot of energy for training, but it's a very slow energy system. And the way our body works energetically is it responds to the intensity of the training. So when you're going on your slow 5K run, because your heart rate isn't elevated as high, your body will use majority fat for that slow burning, sustained energy. But as the intensity increases, your body swaps into this carbohydrate phase. So you start using predominantly carbohydrates as your energy source. So fats are absolutely important. And you think about it in the context of, say, boxing or MMA for Alex, they're your lighter sessions when you've got like technical jiu-jitsu, when you're just kind of shadow sparring in between rounds, when you're trying to recover. Fats are really important. But when you're out there and you're in the ring sparring, you're doing drills, you're hitting the bag, the intensity goes up. So you're using the carbohydrates, right? So it's really getting that balance. And you kind of spoke about before with the paleo diet and there's absolutely merit in that. And the thing is, you don't need carbohydrates necessarily in your diet to survive. If you look at like a metabolism map of how our body turns fats, proteins, and carbohydrates into energy, you can get to the same pathway that turns carbohydrates into energy through fat. And that's absolutely fine. And that's a completely other discussion, because the discussion in the world that I live in, Mark, is performance. It's performance nutrition for combat sport athletes. And when we talk about performance for combat sport athletes, we need that fast glycolytic carbohydrate system working really, really well. If you talk about health and you pivot the conversation that way, it's a whole other discussion. Maybe there's a lot of merit in not putting the carbohydrates in. If you're talking about it in a health perspective, that's not the field that I live in. I live in the world of performance. And when it comes to performance, we see a direct correlation for people who are very diligent and get their carbohydrates in, and how well they perform and how well they recover during combat sport training.
So if I could sort of just for all the normal people out there, maybe just sort of reinterpret that a little bit and tell me if I'm wrong. If you're just training day to day, you don't have a fight coming up, you just want to train, but you like to train every other day at really high intensity. That might be sprint training, or you might be doing erg training, or skiing, or rowing, or whatever it is, boxing, whatever happened to be, but just high intensity training, as opposed to just sort of going on 10K run at 9 Ks an hour. You decide you're going to do 400s, and you're going to do them on a minute 50 or something like that, and you're going to do 10 of them. Basically, you're going to tear your ass out. Okay, so if you're going to do the latter, in other words, do the high intensity stuff, you're saying you'll perform better in those environments if you have enough carbs. You don't have to overdo it, but you're going to have enough carbs. If you just want to lose, if you just want to burn fat and/or and just go on your 7K or your 10K runner at 9 Ks an hour, like a sort of a reasonable pace, then you don't really necessarily need the carbs coming out of carbohydrates, like sugars and bread, or porridge, or whatever it is. You can do that as a result of just having a good balance of fats in your diet, like olive oil and meat and stuff like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it all comes down to what's your goal. Yeah, like what's your goal, right? Like if your goal in those high intensity interval trainings is to be the fastest and to win against everyone else in your
what do you think, man? We're gonna doesn't matter where we're training. Most people, you see them, especially the women, fuck man, they go to those high intensity classes, they're all competing with each other. They want to beat the blokes, and they're really good too. So and they love performing. So yeah, they're looking for that quick switch.
If performance is the goal, absolutely, you need to fuel that training appropriately. But if performance isn't the goal and you just want to lose weight, ultimately, we've shown this time and time again, doesn't matter how many studies we run, you just need to be in a calorie deficit. And then it's like a question of how much of a glutton for punishment are you? You can rock up and do that high intensity interval, and you can have a diet that's 90% fat, and you can still be in a calorie deficit, and you'll probably still lose weight. But geez, that high intensity interval training session will not be very fun. You'll hate it. Or you could still be in a calorie deficit and kind of periodize your carbohydrates appropriately, rock up to that training session, be well fueled for the training you're about to do, still be in a calorie deficit, which is never fun, but probably perform a lot better. So it really just comes down to what's your goal? What do you want to do with it?
Yeah, before we get to fight, I have one more question for you, Geordie. In the fight camp, or in the 12-week prep period, or whatever the prep period is, and assuming you want to lose some weight, fat I'm talking about. What are the dangers of not having, what are the dangers of training at a high intensity level and not having enough carbs and or fats in your diet? I mean, what can it do to you? I mean, apart from, you won't perform as well, are there any dangers to us?
Yeah, there's two things that you can talk about here. There's short-term dangers, and then there's long-term dangers. And I've seen both of them in my job. So short-term, and you've probably experienced this, Mark, and seen guys in the gym. It seems they say they have an 8-week camp, and then say they cut carbohydrates, or they're in a huge calorie deficit. All of a sudden, everyone, their last 4 weeks has the sniffles, and they're coughing and they're sick. They've become immunosuppressed because they just physically haven't had the calories in their body to fuel their immune system. That's extremely common. Your risk of injury goes up. Your risk of sustaining a concussion goes up when you're under fueled. These things, you generally feel terrible. Like you've made weight for a fight, and if you're cutting in that huge calorie deficit, you're probably moody. You're not in the best headspace. Your mental health can deteriorate. You're not sleeping well.
Don't sleep well, yeah.
Yes. There's acceptable ranges depending and acceptable things that happen being in a calorie deficit. But again, it comes back to, okay, how well did you fuel that training session? You can still be in a calorie deficit and eat a lot of carbohydrates before and after and get your protein in. We kind of work on a principle of the three principle of get your complex carbohydrates in and your fast acting carbs around training, and maintain that protein intake all throughout the day. And then, as I said earlier, make sure you're getting the minimal amount of fat to sustain and maintain that hormonal health. You can follow all of those principles and still be in a calorie deficit and hit your weight targets. But a lot of people, like you said, they go to the night and they just go in a huge calorie deficit, cut carbohydrates, and you see all of those short-term problems. Now, when you talk about what happens in the long term, this is a real problem, and especially for weight category sports, and you can talk about mentally what this happens in terms of like eating disorders or disordered eating, but metabolically, you see this a lot when fighters, like I spoke about, use this carbohydrate system so much and depend on it in their training. When they're not putting in that fuel, it's like that old saying at the gym that I think Arnold used to say, use it or lose it. You lose the ability to use those carbohydrates efficiently. And you see it, we can test it in the labs, how metabolically efficient your body is at using carbohydrates compared to fats. And I see this quite a lot with fighters who've done this over a long term, over their whole careers, where they've not put carbohydrates in their diet appropriately, had a really high fat diet. They become too efficient at burning fat and not efficient enough at burning carbohydrates, which means when you put the carbohydrates in there, their body doesn't know what to do with it. And in a practical sense at their training, we call it never being able to get out of like third gear. You never be able to get in that fourth and fifth gear. And that's a real problem. And then you see these problems where their metabolism will slow down if they've constantly been under eating for a sustained period of time. We call that a hypometabolic state. That's really tough, because if they're at a hypometabolic state, say, Mark, your body needs 2,000 calories to survive, but you've eaten at 1,400 calories for the last 2-3 years, your body will adjust and dial back to that 1,400 calories. All of a sudden you go, hey, Geordie, I want to lose 5 kilos. I go, well, to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit, but your body's so used to being at 1,400 calories. To be in a deficit, we got to go to 600 to 800, and that's just not sustainable. So those things are what can happen in the long term when people don't take their nutrition seriously, or periodize their carbohydrates appropriately, or get the right amount of fat, or preserve their muscle mass by spacing that protein out throughout the day. So you get those real short term, the moodiness, you don't sleep right, you can get sick, you feel terrible, your partner will probably leave you because you're a banshee. And then you've got the long term effects of, you can literally change your metabolism for the worse and bring it down. You can get health problems, like females can lose their period, guys, their testosterone will go down. You can get all these hormonal changes if you don't do it right in the long term.
Well, that's it's funny, I wonder whether, I don't want to take it back to myself, but like I have had experiences where I've lost a lot of weight training, and you look at yourself and you go, wow, that looks good. And, but you feel pretty fucked, and you're dull. I mean, and I don't, as you said, I don't sleep well in those times. And then you jump into the fight. Let's say it's just an amateur fight and you're just doing 3-2s. For some reason, your body doesn't respond for the first 2 rounds. Like it just feels like you've got no energy. And then in the 3rd round, and all of a sudden your body starts responding, and you feel like you need to do another 3 rounds. In other words, and you lose the fight because the first 2 rounds you were shit out. So you're just playing around, but you're sort of your brain's half dead. I just wonder whether that's sort of what you're talking about here, because your body's not responding. You're not sharp enough because you have been sort of not starving yourself, but you're sort of so worried about the weight and the food that you're eating. And I think I've seen fighters do this. I've seen them, they get in the first couple of rounds and they're tired. They're not responding, and you can't afford to lose a round, especially in an amateur 3 2-minute round. You can't lose 1 round. And I guess that's sort of what you're talking about here. Is just a lot of this just comes back to diet. Are there any difference between male and female? Like, I mean, do you treat them differently?
Yeah, like absolutely, and that's a really hot topic right now, Mark, in the sports nutrition world. And I won't claim to be an expert in it because I think the best saying I've ever heard about it is when you look at the endocrine system, which is all your hormones and all of that jazz. If you look at the endocrine system of a male, you and me, Mark, could go to on our lunch break and get a coffee, and in our 30-minute lunch break, we could probably learn that pretty fast. If we had to learn the female endocrine system and learn how all that works out, we'd probably have to spend a year doing it, a year's worth of coffee breaks. So it's far more complex. And the thing is, there's so many other factors that come in it. It's you've got oral contraceptive pills, which have different levels of hormones. You know, the two main female hormones, estrogen and progesterone. The oral contraceptives can have them in different amounts. We don't know in the research as of yet, what do they do? What happens? We don't know, hey, during a female cycle, is there better times to train? I know from practice, from cutting weight in that fight week, there's definitely periods at times, say when estrogen's higher, just before a female goes on their period, they'll hold more water. So you need to absolutely take that into account. I'm not going to claim that we know know all the ins and outs. I don't think anyone in the world knows it right now. What we do in practice with our girls, and we look after a lot of females, is you've got to diligently track. You've got to get them to understand where they're at each week. How does their body respond each week in their cycle? What happens when right before their cycle, do they notice they put on more fluid? Do they feel really tired? Afterwards, do they get a lot of drop of water, and can they train a bit better? And okay, if we put too many carbs in this space, do you really get bloated and feel sick, or do you get PMS around here? You've just got to track it, and you've got to really work with them to understand it. And then it becomes a game of, okay, we need to kind of time this with your next fight and make sure, okay, if you hold water at this stage here of your cycle, we need to be aware of that. And we need, it's an interesting area though. And I think it's a bit of a watch this space, because I know a lot of big researchers that I work with are getting lots and lots of funding. And I think it's a race to be the first person to crack that puzzle.
Let's talk about fight week. So this is the week where, you know, you're walking around at, Alex is walking around at 70 and he has to weigh in, well, he's walking around at 68 and he has to weigh in at 66. He's got to lose a couple of kilos. And, you know, he's got no fat. He's just carries no weight because he's been training. He's training 3 times a day. So he's ripped. I want to talk about, I'd like you to talk to me about the importance of water. But I just want to give you recite an example of something that someone told me many years ago. There's a guy in Australia. He was the world, I think he was the former IBF featherweight boxing champion of the world. His name was Will Tomlinson. Will would probably be about these days 34 or something. Anyway, when he was 29, he held the world title, and he told me something quite interesting. He said he used to have to drop quite a lot of weight to get down to featherweight. Featherweight in boxing is 55, 56 kilos. He would just not drink water. Okay, just completely cut water out. Not just in the fight week, but for a long period of time. And he said to me, he believes that the reason he got knocked out in his last defense of his world title very, very quickly in the first round was largely as a result of his brain not having enough fluid around it as a result of him not having recovered from the water drop. So he drops water, makes weight, starts ripping the water into his body, back into his body before the fight. Usually you weigh in, say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, and you usually fight Friday night, I don't know, 10, 11 o'clock in the main event. So, you got 28 hours or something like that to, rehydrate. But the brain, for some reason, maybe is the last thing to rehydrate. That's what he said. Explain what the water, the relationship between water and the brain. It's not just in the brain, but surround the brain, and how that can contribute to a knockout really quickly, because the brain gets rattled. I mean, am I talking? I mean, this is just
no
shit I'm talking about, or is this real?
No, and it's something you see a lot in practice, right? When guys do a big weight cut. I guess the physio on my team, who's doing a PhD, he's actually looking at concussion research and combat sport athletes, and this is a big question that we want to answer, because me as a practitioner, I've seen this. I've got calls from guys late, and it's been an opportunity. They can't do it, and we've done it in the safest way. But like you said, they go out there and their brain probably hasn't been rehydrated. And it is absolutely a thing. You see it, we call it like you lose your chin. And I guess I'll kind of wind it back and I'll explain why that might happen, because your body, and to do this, you kind of got to understand how your body places water. And like you said, being hydrated and cutting water out for weeks on end probably isn't the best. You probably want to be dehydrated for the least amount of time. And I'll explain why that is. So your body holds water in 3 different compartments. So it will hold water in your blood. It'll hold it like outside your cells, like your cells is what make up your body, and then inside your cells, kind of in that order, right? When you sweat, when Mark, you go for a run or you start hitting pads or whatever, water comes from your blood and it moves to the surface of your skin. The reason it does that is because your core body temperature is gone up and it wants to cool itself down. And just the way that sweating is designed, it'll remove heat when it comes off the skin. That's why we move water, right? So what we have found in cutting weight is a very unique and very interesting position, because people are forcibly sweating. It's not like just a normal training session or whatever. They do these dehydration methods and then they push that sweating system almost to the extremes. Now, there's not exact numbers that we know, but my team, we use the principle that if you lose 1 to 2% of your body weight, we're pretty confident that you're probably only losing fluid from within your blood, which is right next to your skin. It's not that big of a deal. If you put fluid back in, it goes down your esophagus, into your stomach, into your intestine's right there. It'll probably go back into your blood pretty easy. I'd be pretty confident I could rehydrate. That's 1 to 2% of your body weight. So, and then we talk about, okay, if you go 3 to 4% of your body weight, it's been shown that there's going to be fluid coming in from not just your blood, but from outside of your cells. So outside of your cells, the water's going to shift this way and it's going to move from there into your blood, because you need to keep the fluid in your blood, because the blood is what's going around your body, bringing oxygen and nutrients and keeping you alive. So your body protects that blood really, really, really importantly. So it comes in and it goes and then it'll sweat out. That's about 3 to 4%. We theorize and we think that when you go over that 4 to 5%, so if you rock up on weigh-in day and you go into the sauna and you lose more than 4 to 5%, all of a sudden you start shifting water from not just the blood, not just outside your cells, but inside your cells. And you start moving it that way. So it goes from inside your cells to the space outside, into your blood, onto your skin, you sweat it off and your body attempts to cool down. The problem, and this comes back to your concussion, is that we know that when you move fluid from inside your cells, it probably takes a lot longer than 24 hours to rehydrate adequately. And the reason that is because when you put fluid back in and you drink it, goes through in your intestines, goes back into your blood, goes outside the cells, there's transporters here. And there's only so many transporters that allow fluid to move across the cell, right? And the way that the fluid will move, it's based on time. Time is the factor that's important. So it doesn't matter if you cut a lot of weight and you go put an IV in and you put all the fluid back in really fast. If you've taken water out from inside the cells, it doesn't matter, because it's based on time. It doesn't matter how much fluid's there. It just takes time. What we think, and what a lot of the experts around the world that I work with think, is that it takes a lot more than 24 hours. Now, coming back to your question about the brain, this is why we think, okay, guys that do big weight cuts, and it's not unusual for guys to be doing 5 to 10% on that day. So you're bringing a lot of fluid out from, say, your brain or inside your cell, like your brain cells. Think of it as if you had a cup that's full of water and you drop a rock in it and you shake it up, that rock's not going to move a lot. But if you take out the water, put the rock in and shake it, what happens? It hits the sides and everything. That's what we think happens to your brain, and again, to your liver, to your kidneys, to your other organs, when you do those weight cuts and you lose more than 4 to 5%. And that's when it's kind of scary. And guys will come out and they'll say, okay, we did a 5, 10%. No matter how good my rehydration is, it's probably not going to get back in there. You go out into the ring, you're at a higher risk. And it's not uncommon. You probably saw recently the gentleman that unfortunately got hit and he didn't get back up. And that happens quite a lot. I would say there would be some type of dehydration that would be involved in that.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because like a lot of the old school trainers say we don't want you to lose too much weight over this 12-week period. But what we're going to do is we're just going to absolutely stop drinking water. and even eating food and sauna and baths, hot baths, and where you and get in and get out of the bath 2 or 3 times as hot as you can take it. They're actually probably dropping at least 5% of your body weight. So like 5% at 67 kilos, you're talking about 3 kilos. So that's doesn't. I've seen people lose 3 kilos from 70 down to 66 kilos more. And that I can sort of see how that would that's why that's an issue. And what you're sort of saying is maybe during the fight camp, you've got to get yourself in a position where you only need to lose maybe 2 to 3% of your body weight before weigh-in. Is that
well, here's the thing, Mark, and here's the kicker. So you use the example of Alex earlier, and if Alex came into fight week at 68 to 70 kilos, I think he'd have a chuckle if he heard that. So Alex is probably coming in, and most of my guys, I like them coming into that fight week. Given that we have the UFC, we have about 30 to 36 hours to rehydrate. So again, keeping in mind that that's longer than that 24 hours. If we do that, pretty confident they're going to rehydrate. If they come in about 10% of their body weight out, I'm pretty confident that using our fight week strategies, our fight week protocol, I can get them down to weight quite safely. And we talk about water manipulation. I would class that as our red zone high risk strategy. So we have a few other strategies that we'll use with these guys during that fight week, where you can get, say, anywhere between 1 to 5 to 6% of their body weight off before you have to resort to water. And the first one is simply just, say, removing fiber from their diet. If they have a high fiber diet, fiber is very healthy. You should eat it all year round, except in the 3 days before you weigh in. If you remove fiber, you're removing dead gut content in your gut. That's all it's doing, is just dead weight. That's just weighing you down. Flush that out. That can potentially be up to 1 kilo of just weight, or anywhere between, let's say, 0.5 to 1% of your body weight. So that's 0.5 to 1% just there. The next thing you can do is play around and manipulate their sodium, so their added salt. We know that when you put salt in, salt attracts water. So it makes sense if we remove the salt in their diet to an extent, remove the salt in their diet, they won't hold on to as much water. What we can also do is play around with, say, water loading protocols. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to drink 8 to 10 liters. You just need to increase your water intake. So you're increasing your urination going up. That will cause an effect in your kidneys that if you time it right, you can cut the water for, say, only 12 to 18 hours and you'll keep urinating. So you can do that with
urinating before. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, even there, you've got 1 to 3%. So let's say best outcome happens. So that's 4% just there. We can do what the old school boxers found out years and years ago, and what we call a glycogen reduction. So for, say, 4 or 5 days before weigh-ins, we'll remove the carbohydrate in the diet. And like I said, the carbohydrate is super important for the muscle. But remember, I said for every 1 gram of that glycogen or that energy in the muscle, you got 2 to 3 grams of water going with it. So when you remove that glycogen and you can do some glycogen depleting exercise, you remove the glycogen, but you also take the fluid out with it. And depending, like Volko is a very thick, dense guy. He has a lot of glycogen. So he can lose up to 3 to 5% of his body weight by just using that strategy. So all of a sudden we've come into fight week at 10% out, but we used our low fiber. We've, say, got 1% there. We've done our water and sodium manipulation. Let's say we did that in a pretty moderate way. We've got 2% there. That's 3%. And then with that glycogen reduction, say we've got 3% there. That's 6% of his body weight that we've lost. Come time to when we do our water cut and we sit in the bath, Volk's only got about 3 or 4% that he actually needs to do, as opposed to coming in that fight week, eating like a sparrow, doing nothing, and then cutting 10% of water in the sauna. It's a lot more methodical. It's a lot more what we call low risk, and it's a lot more safer, I would say. And it puts them in that red zone for a very limited amount of time, only a matter of hours. And then we can control what they're losing. I can get a pretty good idea and pretty good understanding and have a lot of confidence that after he weighs in, because he only lost that 4%, I can put that fluid back in, and in 30, 36 hours, Volk will go into that cage as the best version of himself, ready to defend his world title.
It's funny, I was just thinking then, it's good that, applying science and technology to what you did with Volkanovski was pretty important, particularly in his last fight against Max Holloway, because I guess you remember Max hit him in the first round with a kick, and like if he had been, if his brain had not had been properly rehydrated, his body not properly rehydrated, he probably would have got knocked out. But when he got that kick, he just bounced straight back up and got back straight in it. Like it was like nothing had happened. He had no sort of brain response whatsoever. In fact, his brain response was just get back up and like shape up and it must have freaked out Holloway a little bit because Holloway thought he got a clean hit on him, and then Alex just sort of, fuck that, there's nothing. So I want to democratize the conversation because we're going to run out of time, but I just want to democratize this a little bit. So just generally for people, I mean, you're a dietitian, not just about the science of diet and nutrition, etc. What would you say to people generally who have healthy lifestyles? In other words, they train, they exercise. It might not be too extreme, but they exercise every day. They work in environments. They speak a lot. I mean, and people don't realize we expel a lot of fluids when you talk. We lose a lot of fluid when we sleep overnight. Most people don't realize, but I mean, you probably lose a kilo between going to bed and waking up in the morning. What would you say to people, just as a general rule, as to how to look after yourself? I mean, I know it's a question without notice, and it's probably not necessarily your exact bailiwick, but what would you say? What would you say to these people, like older, younger? Like, how do we think about how we live our lives in terms of what we put in our gut?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And it's I often think about this, and the same 6 principles, the same 6 core principles that we use with some of Australia and New Zealand's most elite athletes, everyone can apply them. Everyone can apply them because really 90% of the work is done if you can put these 6 principles in place. And then everything else, like the fueling up between training, the making sure you're recovering, the exact calories in to get the weight, that's where that extra 10% for those high level athletes kind of comes in. But for everyday folk like you and me, Mark, there's 6 principles we always talk about. And again, it's a focus on the 3 macronutrients. So get a good balance of all 3 of them. Carbohydrates, good, complex, unprocessed, no added sugar carbohydrates. So that's talking about like your whole meals, your oatmeals, things like that. Brown carbohydrates, good sources of highly bioavailable protein. So that's plant protein is absolutely fine. Just make sure we're getting enough of it to fulfill our needs. But animal proteins are very highly bioavailable. Getting that regularly throughout your day, every 3 hours, get that protein in. Then with your fat, I always say to guys, make sure you're getting in plant and marine based fat. So these are things like your salmon, your nuts, even oils, getting in your olive oils, things like that. Minimally processed. Of course, there's always room to have the process. And then there's the 3 supporting principles that we always talk about, and it's sleep, making sure that you're getting your 8 hours of sleep. Sleep is very individual. Some people just they can function on 6 hours. Some people need 10 hours. Find out what your most optimal sleep is and make it a priority, because without that, those other 3 principles aren't going to work. Stress, manage your stress, whether that's, it doesn't have to be yoga and every morning at 6 a.m. It can be whatever it is that you find to manage stress, taking 10 minutes for yourself every day. Do something. Again, that's going to support those first 3 principles. And then the last one is your hydration habits. Like you said, you lose a lot of fluid. And if anyone's listening, try it. Go weigh yourself first thing in the morning, and then don't eat for 2-3 hours, and then go weigh yourself, and you'll lose weight because you're expending fluid just through your body's metabolism. Again, through perspiration, through like you talking, just you moving around. Our body and the human metabolism needs fluid to work, needs H2O, needs water to work. So you're going to use it. Keep a bottle of water next to your desk. Again, there's recommendations of how much to have. Whatever is comfortable for you. If you can have a 2-liter bottle and you can get through half of that in the morning, half of that in the afternoon, and that works, just be mindful of it. So again, it's those 6 principles, and we use that with our top level athletes. That's our baseline. We say for everyone that comes through TFD, we have to get those six fundamental principles down pat, and then we'll start layering on top the performance nutrition. Then we'll start putting the sprinkles on the cake. Maybe you can take a supplement that can get this, but unless you've got those fundamental principles down pat, you're not going to get very far with all that other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, since I've got to tell everybody, since I spoke to Geordie a couple of weeks ago, I was preparing for an exhibition fight, but it's not on now because we couldn't get the Combat Commission approval. But irrespective, I have to say that I felt I put a little bit of weight on, but it's okay because I train and I'll lose it straight away. But I feel much better. I'm actually sleeping much better, and largely the thing that I've adopted out of those 6 principles, I was doing most of them, not in a formatted way or a formulaic way, but I was doing most of those things. But the thing I was not doing was the hydration. And I found that since I'm forcing myself to drink water, and I usually have to put something with it because I really don't like the taste of water. So I put something with it. Doesn't matter, just something to give it a bit of taste. I feel much better. My mental acuity is better. I sleep a lot better. I just feel more energetic towards everything I do. And I put on maybe a kilo, but that's okay. I know I can lose a kilo pretty easy if I need to. But it's not a kilo of fat, it's just a kilo. And I have to say that hydration piece is extreme, for me anyway, is extremely important. But I think those 6 principles is an important thing. Those 6 principles, and hopefully everybody who's out there in my business world, who's my business audience, listens to that. Because if you're in business, you got to be fit for business too. I mean, like Geordie's a fight dietitian, like fit for fights, physically fit for a fight. You got to be physically fit to run in business because basically you're in competition with everybody and you're fighting to survive. Literally, you're in the octagon. You're in business, mate. You're in the octagon, from the moment you get out of bed to the moment you go to bed at night. And even then you're still in the octagon because you start dreaming about shit you didn't fucking fix during the day. So you're in the octagon and you're in it 7 days a week. It's hard being in business like you are. You're a small business owner. You're kicked off. You're self-employed. You've got people you're responsible for. Not only your clients, your fighters, but also your staff and your associates and your colleagues and everybody you speak to on Instagram and all your various social media. So you're responsible for all these people. It's full on. So you've got to stay fit for your business, and you've got to employ these 6 principles yourself. And I think that's great advice for everybody. It's nice, simple. 6 principles. He just said it. 6 fucking principles. And the most important one for me is hydration. But you work out what the most important one that you want to do, and I'll guarantee there's something you are not doing. I remember talking to you some time ago about sort of specific supplements and what elite athletes need to use. And you're about to launch something. What are you launching?
Yeah, so during COVID, Mark, we started a company called TrainAid Performance Solutions. And like you said, from working with these elite level athletes for years, it was funny how there was so many supplements available, but there was probably 3 or 4 core ones that I personally felt I needed and personally felt that my athletes would benefit from that just weren't there, and they just weren't pushed as hard. And so during the COVID period, we started TrainAid Performance Solutions. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be launching our first product as a hydration product, because like we spoke about, hydration is important, not just for the elite level athletes, but business owners, tradesmen, nurses, everyone, everyday folk can be better by enhancing their hydration. So that's a new product that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. It's called TrainAid.
What's the name of your website? Where do we go?
Yeah, so if people want to look it up, it's www.trainaid.com. So that's TRAINADE.com.
And just on that hydration thing, is that something like you put in a bowl of water and it's sort of like the old Hydrolyte type stuff?
Yeah. Kind of like Hydrolyte 3.0. So it'll be a bit more individually dosed. So we've worked with I'm very lucky that I have access to a lot of teams and a lot of, I would call experts in hydration around the world who've helped me formulate this. And we're going to be able to create an algorithm that can say, hey, Mark, you need this many scoops of this for whatever activity, whatever you define as performance in your day, whether it's business, training, whatever. This is how much of this you need to make sure you're hydrated for whatever that is.
Fucking love it. I like being spoon-fed. That's the way I want to roll. I'll be going straight to it. Hurry up and launch it. I mean, maybe just send me a little pack over here so I can try it out, and I'm going to show everybody what it looks like.
I'll be sure to send you down the sample pack for sure.
I want to ask quickly, just where can people find you? I mean, you're called at the Fight Dietitian, but it's I think it's underscore, isn't it?
Yeah, so on Instagram, _Fight Dietitian, on Facebook, The Fight Dietitian. I joined the Twitter world not long ago, and that's a scary, weird place that I don't interact with too much, but that's
100%.
at Fight
I'm
Dietitian.
like you.
Yeah, all the website is www.thefightdietitian.com.
Well, I'll be honest with you, everybody. I should say this to all our audience. I look at his Instagram stuff, Geordie's Instagram stuff, because I find it quite educational. You're always putting up. I mean, your stories are up there, but you're also putting up quite educational stuff. You were talk. I think it was last week. You might have been talking about hydration, but and what you sort of does it. If you follow this, I mean, it leads you on to other inquiry. I mean, and you do quote educational environments. You quote papers. You look at because you're doing all the reading for all of us. You're doing all the research, you're interpreting it in a scientific way. And then what Geordie does is he then pushes it back out to us as consumers of his information in a way that's bite-sized and understandable, or at least fairly understandable from my point of view. And what's more important is able to be applied. And I think you're doing a great job, Geordie. Your social mediums are very educational. I think they are very responsible. I know there's a million other things we can talk about. I'd love to talk about concussions and stuff like that. And maybe we can do this again with your concussion guy, your physiotherapist guy who's doing his PhD on concussion. Because I think to me, this is a rising tide. Health and nutrition is a rising tide, not just for fighters, but for people who just train, and probably for older people, even around whole these areas around dementia, etc. Particularly for people who've been in sport at a younger age, like contact sports and dementia following that. I mean, I got mates who played rugby league at my age, actually suffering from dementia. So I think what you're doing is a great thing. I'm really happy to have you on our Straight Talk session to be able to tell everybody out there listening to this about how important it is to get a diet right. So, mate, good luck to you. And thanks for everything you've done particularly what you did for Alex. We have him and Rob Whittaker. I mean, Rob's not back at the world title level yet, but I hope he does. Alex is our only world champion at the moment in our country. The diet part of what his prep is a really important part of getting him to where he needs to be confidently, so he can actually get out there and mix it up with the likes of Max Holloway, who was the greatest of all time. So that tells me one thing. Alex Volkanovski has to be the new GOAT. Would you agree?
I think so. I think so too. I would agree.
He's the man. So thanks very much. Good to talk to you, mate.
Thanks for having us, Mark. Appreciate it.